Stillman Company is delivered by TriStar Moving ESPN 1025. The game, Trevor Maddich later today. A lot of football because it's June 1st. And guess what? June 1st is not normally a day on the calendar in football terms that matters most, I said I'm all tongue-tied, long weekend.
Yeah, it was long weekend.
June 1st is not a day that matters the most to an NFL fan. You know, there's like 8 dates over the year where literally the NFL is the only thing on anyone's mind. The opening of free agency, the NFL is on everybody's mind. The NFL draft, the NFL is on everybody's mind.
The Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl, opening kickoff weekend, basically every Sunday in the fall. But June 1st is not a date that football fans stand up and say, June 1st, today is a big day. But at least for this June 1st, and I would assume for next June 1st, they are going to be really important. And we'll get to that in a second. And it's very important for the Titans. But I do want to welcome everybody in. Caroline, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good. Ian, how are you?
Just fine, thank you.
I will say this. I meant to use yesterday, Memorial Day. I meant to use that as a day to relax. It was a very eventful weekend. Saw everybody this weekend. It was a great time. Ryan got married. A lot of fun there. Now he's not here,
at his
so
wedding.
We can throw grenades and maybe not get as in trouble for it, which would be fun. But I meant to take yesterday off to kind of, relax.
Mm-hmm. Didn't happen. Tale as old as time.
Didn't do it. And today I'm like, if I just had today off to sit back and
one
relax,
more day.
It would have been. Yes, exactly. We've got a freaking loaded show today. I do, though, want to start with this about June 1st. June 1st is very important in the NFL. And I'm sure most people understand this right now. But basically the way it works is if you want to cut somebody, and let's say you owe them $100 million, just to be a nice round number. If you want to cut them on May 30th, that all accelerates into the 2021 cap. You owe $100 million. If you wait until June 2nd and you make that trade, you split it over the 2 years. So you pay $50 million this year. You pay $50 million next year. So you can absorb a cap hit easier. That's why Atlanta has waited this long for Julio Jones, because it had to be after June 1st. So all the signing bonus money that Atlanta paid out, half would go for this year, half would go for next year. It's the same with Aaron Rodgers, although I don't think Aaron Rodgers is getting traded. But that's how June 1st works. But June 1st is very important to these Tennessee Titans. But there's 2 reasons why. The Titans fans, and I'm not knocking the fans here. Fans are fans, and I get it. Every time a big-name player hits the market, we have the discussion of whether or not the Titans should be interested. We had the discussion whether or not they should be interested in Odell Beckham Jr. when he was with the Giants before he went to Cleveland. We had the discussion with Antonio Brown throughout many of his here and there and here and there. Pittsburgh, New England, Tampa Bay. What are we going to do? Antonio Brown, should they go get him? Le'Veon Bell. We had similar talks. J.J. Watt, we had talks about should the Titans go get them. I'm guessing every local market that has an NFL team that is somewhat good has these kind of talks on a consistent basis. Should they not? So a lot of people want to talk about Julio Jones. It's the big name. We have taken callers that think if the Titans trade for Julio Jones, that they are a Super Bowl contender. We had Jason Fitz from ESPN Radio on our show last week. Fitz says if the Titans were to acquire Julio Jones, they would be the 2nd or 3rd best team in the AFC, right there with Buffalo, not as good as Kansas City. But all these other teams the Titans are lumped with right now, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Baltimore, Indianapolis, forget about them. Fitz says they're better if they get Julio Jones. I'm not sure I necessarily completely agree with that, but I don't think Julio Jones is the big topic of discussion at the Titan facility right now. I'm not talking about what's the big discussion on TV, what's the big discussion on radio, what's the big discussion amongst the fans. The big name is always going to be the big discussion. You turn on ESPN right now. What are they talking about? They're not really talking about how the Toronto Maple Leafs, for the umpteenth time, just absolutely blew the first round of a playoff series to the Montreal Canadiens, a team that has already fired its coach this season that has no business being in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. They're not talking about that on TV. They're talking about Aaron Rodgers and Julio Jones and LeBron James and the Dallas Cowboys, probably, the stars. Does anybody wonder who's going to play tight end for the Tennessee Titans? This is why June 1st matters to me. Zach Ertz is the name that has come up a lot. TD has certainly brought it up on this show. TD covered Zach Ertz in Philadelphia. We know Philadelphia probably headed for a rebuild. Philadelphia has maxed out the cap years and years and years in a row. Ertz may not be that kind of player anymore. But the Tennessee Titans need a tight end. And I just don't know how you go into the season and you consider yourself a competitor in the AFC or somebody that perhaps could make a Super Bowl without a starting two-way tight end. They don't have a tight end. So I hear all the talk about Julio Jones on one hand, and I keep thinking in my head, they don't have a tight end. It's almost like in politics, right? People get more mad about what the president does or what the vice president does than they do their own local officials. Well, I just want people to know this. I've got tax assessments now on my homes after they basically increased property taxes, or they increased property taxes, then they brought them down, and they've reappraised everything, and guess what? Everything's up. That affects me. What somebody, at the national level of politics, what a congressperson in Virginia doesn't necessarily affect the average American person. But they'll put it on TV, on Fox News or CNN, because people will talk about it. But does it really affect you? They raise property taxes for everybody. That affects me. Julio Jones, it's fun to talk about. The Titans are one of the rumored teams that are right there. A lot of Titan fans think that this is the move that puts them over the top. But is it as important as figuring out who's going to start at tight end for the Tennessee Titans? How important the tight end position is for the Tennessee Titans? Again, they don't have a starting tight end. And this, I will go back to the Predators. You can put a guy on the first line and you can say he's a first-line player. But if he's not actually a first-line player, you're going to get beat by Sebastian Aho, who's a big boy forward for the Carolina Hurricanes. You're going to run into a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning that has tons of first-line players, and you're going to get beat. If you roll into the season with Anthony Ferkser, who is not a starting tight end, as your starting tight end, you really think you have a shot to compete with Kansas City? This is a guy who for the last 3 years has run onto the football field when Derrick Henry, the best player on the team, runs off of the field. You haven't trusted him for 3 years to block. And now you're going to put him out there and say, okay, Anthony Ferkser, you're blocking for Derrick Henry. We didn't trust you over the last 3 years to block, but now we believe. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I get the infatuation with Julio. And I do think that there are ways the Titans could acquire Julio, though I would not do them, and I understand why you all want Julio. And maybe I'm wrong when it comes to Julio, and I think that he's too expensive. I think that he's too injury-prone, and I think that he's too old. And I say, I just don't think that the value added in Julio Jones is that big, and everybody thinks I'm crazy sometimes when I say it. I might be wrong. You might be right. Maybe Julio comes right in and does exactly what Stephon Diggs did for the Buffalo Bills offense. But I kind of doubt it. Just like Clowney didn't do it for the defense. Just like Eric Decker didn't do it for the offense a couple of years ago. Not sure Julio gives the offense what everybody wants it to be. I'm looking at tight end. And there are a lot of names that have already come up. We've talked about Zach Ertz already. Philadelphia looks like he's going to be on the move. I think there are going to be guys around the league that are surprised when they are released tomorrow, which I think we will see a bunch of names released. And I do wonder if the Titans could be looking at releasing people of their own. But before I get too caught into this whole Julio Jones, June 2nd, what are the Titans going to do? It's June 1st. Titans got to make an offer. Titans got to put it down. Titans got to go. Who is the tight end of the Tennessee Titans? And as June 1st approaches, that's my biggest question. Who is the tight end going to be? Because I still think there are a lot of moves left to be made. I think there may be a move made on the offensive line. I think there could be some moves made perhaps in special teams. But I certainly think right now the Titans have 3 rookies they've got to sign. They've got $3 million in cap space. That would put them right up against it for next year. What do you think about how they will go about doing this? Because to me, right now, they need a tight end. They need a kicker. They need depth at outside linebacker. Perhaps they need a slot wide receiver. And adding a $15 million Julio Jones is probably not the